So our break came to an end, and let's start the new session, European approach on data governance. So everything, as the moderator Moritz said, it will be about data, lots of things about data, and I want to ask our moderator, which is Moritz Taylor, Data Protection Unit, Council of Europe, to present his panelists. Moritz?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name, as she said, is Moritz Taylor. I work at the Data Protection Unit at the Council of Europe. Our session is on the European approach on data governance. Council of Europe has a bit of experience in this. In 1981, they made Convention 108, which was the first convention on the automatic processing of personal data. And since then, we're up to 55 parties. And we've got Convention 108 Plus, the updated version, which needs a couple more ratifications to come into force, but assures extra protection for people. So based on that and our expertise and our knowledge, we've invited our experts today. First, for us, the approach was to look at it from a research perspective and from a regulatory perspective. And we thought we'd have kind of representations of people who work with data on a global level, on a regional level in Europe specifically, and then more on a national level. So I'll just introduce our panelists. First, we have Maria Vujeda. She's a senior expert advisor at the Croatian Data Protection Authority. Then we have Aurélie Merchiol, the data protection officer at the IRD, which is a French research institute on sustainable development. And then we have Darius Amilavicius, and he's the chief data architect at the Information Society Development Committee, and the chief researcher and head of AI research group at the university here in Lithuania. So thank you. And I'll allow everyone to give a brief 3-minute statement before we then move on to questions. Our hope is there'll be audience participation, but if not, we have plenty of things to discuss. Please, Maria.
Thank you, Moritz, and good afternoon to everyone. I would first like to express my gratitude to have a chance to speak today on this panel. Gratitude to the organizers and to the Council of Europe. So as introduction, I will share a few thoughts about data governance, more precisely about Data Governance Act and the importance of the open data from the perspective of the Data Protection Authority. So the European Union has been at the forefront of promoting open data through its comprehensive legislation. And this European Union legislation is a cornerstone of the broader European strategy of data, launched in 2020. So on the EU level, it has been recognized the great potential of data, both for social, for economical and social potential of data, and the importance of the open data. So some of the key objectives of the European open data policies are fostering economic growth and innovation by making public sector data more available. The EU aims to stimulate economic growth. Also, one of the key objectives are ensuring transparency and accountability, promoting citizens' engagement, and encouraging reuse of resources. So what are the benefits of open data? One of the main benefits are the possibility to make informed decision making. Open data provide valuable insights both for private and public sector to make informed strategic decisions. Also, some of the benefits which we could highlight are innovation and product development. For example, if entrepreneur would have data, they can use these data to identify some gaps in the market and to provide innovative solutions. Also, open data improved government and community communication and evidence-based policy development. So one of the most important act when we talk about open data is for sure European Data Governance Act, which entered into the force in June 2022 and is fully applicable from September 2023. So the DGA is the scope of the DGA is both personal and non-personal data, and this is a cross-sectoral legal instrument that aims to regulate the reuse of public health protected data by boosting data sharing through the regulation of novel providers of data sharing services known as data intermediaries and by encouraging the sharing of data for altruistic purposes. So these are like two, we can say like novelties which Data Governance Act regulates and which somehow we expect that it will encourage and boost the data sharing between data holders and data users. So I believe that later in the discussion we will have opportunity maybe to speak more about that. Thank you.
Does it work? Do you hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. So I am Data Protection Officer. I'm sure you know what it means. In a public sector and scientific research, French institute which work all around the world. So I would like to explain the issues and difficulties that I have in my job to make compliant with GDPR. First one, the non-official recognition of adequacy by local DPAs. I will explain. DPAs, Data Protection Authority. A lot of countries in the world have imported European values in their data protection regulation, you know that. But what happens when public research want to transfer data from rest of the world to EU? I will give you an example. An African data protection authority told me that even if GDPR is applicable in the EU, they need to officially deliberate to recognize our legislation. So, in practice, we needed to have an authorization to the public research. And in practice, this involves making an authorization which make around 1 year to be given by the DPA. Another question I would like to speak here is the question of interpretation of the text of the regulation by Data Protection Authority. The text of GDPR, like you know, requires justification to carry out data processing. You can find consent or performance of contract or the performance of a task carried out in a public interest, and 3 other cases. The notion of public interest is subject to interpretation. In West Africa, for example, you need to have the nationality to use this legitimate interest, not this public interest, sorry. In other words, processing data by a French public research organization like EuroDIG cannot be based on this public interest. In fact, we need to have an authorization and to ask for consent. So you know that consent in GDPR is very hard to prove, and you can withdraw consent, and it's not adequate with public research. I just finished. I see the prompt. I will give the floor.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy and very glad to be here. I am working in Information Society Committee as chief data scientist. In Lithuanian now is acting the reform of public sector data governance. It's very important because under the umbrella of this reform, our committee are doing big project to create new architect structure of public sector data, to create ontology, to make sense how the data is moving from one user to other. But this is very important because in this case, we can make data more findable, more accessible, more reusable. We are introducing common standards for describing the data, for transmitting the data. But during our project, we found that technical part to describe data and so on is easiest part. We can easily push the data into public sector data space, but it's very hard to pull out for customers from this data space and to use this data because of the protection requirements. Public sector data is full of sensitive data, of personal data, so this is very interesting data for all. But for example, in Lithuania, public sector is biggest provider of data. For this reason, public sector data is very important for scientific research, for startups, for science, for business. On the other side, I am working in university, one of Lithuanian universities, and we are creating scientific research data space. This reform is only at the beginning of this reform. We are trying to make part of European scientific research data space, and in public data space and scientific data space, we have big problems with regulation. In science research data space, there, for example, intellectual property rights. On the other side, in public sector, personal data and other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, before we move on to opening the floor to everybody, I think it might be valuable for me to be able to ask you each a question as well. Maybe I'll start with Maria. So how do you think, since you mentioned it now, this Data Governance Act, how do you think that's going to impact data protection specifically, especially of personal data?
Well, as it was mentioned before, the scope of Data Governance Act will include also personal and non-personal data, but within the open data legal framework, actually data protection law plays a crucial role. So the principle of the data protection regulation of the GDPR have this important law in applying open data legislation and in general in any situation which involves data processing. This Data Governance Act is making very clear that if the evaluated activity will involve processing of personal data, then the GDPR should prevail. So this Data Governance Act reinforces the protection provided by the GDPR, and it ensures that all the data processing and all the activities that are involved under Data Governance Act should respect and should comply with existing data protection regulation. Actually, this data protection, like providers of data sharing services, they are somehow a novelty with this Data Governance Act. And the aim of them, so somehow they will connect data holders, they will create relationship between data holders and data users, and they should ensure the security of data and transparency standards. But they will, in this activity, they will be completely neutral in a way that they will not use this data. They will just somehow connect those who need data and those who are providing data. And when it comes to data altruism, organization, with this Digital Governance Act, it will be allowed to voluntarily share data for public purposes like scientific research. But in this case, like those data subjects who would like, for example, to share their data will give consent for sharing this data, which should be complied with the GDPR. So somehow this Digital Governance Act is somehow all the activities should be compliant with the GDPR and is actually strengthening these data protection principles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And perhaps Aurélie, it's adjacent to this, what Maria has been talking about. How can data be shared safely, or how could we improve sharing the data safely across borders, across institutions, in a way that protects people's data, again, keeps them safe?
I think that the best way is anonymization, but in public scientific research, it's not the good way, because we have to prove the veracity of the research. So anonymization, it's not possible. We just can pseudonymize. Yeah. And moreover, the details of the data must be made available to the other scientific to reproduce and enrich research. So we have solution, but we have another issues.
Thank you very much. And so Darius, before we open the floor, one last question for you as well. How can we ensure that data is available for machine learning, deep learning, and in particular, how can we ensure that it's public sector data that is available for these tools?
Very difficult, but very good question. In Lithuania, we have a data lake that serves as a sandbox for data analytics purposes. It's a safe place to make some experiments with data analysis, with the vast amount of data. But this data lake is not suitable for machine learning. For my purposes, I must have big amount of data now, not tomorrow, today. Let me give one example. My team in university and Central Police Department of Lithuania were doing common project to create a very specific chatbot for Lithuanian police. To train this chatbot, I must obtain the data from police. They have thousands of emails, thousands of hours of telephone conversation records. But to obtain permission to research this data, to use this data, I spent 4 months to obtain all permissions. Like you know, project is limited in time. So 4 months of my project, I spent only to take the permission. We are also working in the health sector, the same story. 4-5 months to obtain the permissions to have possibility to analyze health records. So for analysis purposes, we have solved this problem with data lake, with the sandbox for analytic purposes. In our Lithuanian artificial intelligence strategy, we have put our need to create a sandbox for artificial intelligence, needs to create access to big data, because like I said, the principal provider of data in Lithuania is public sector, but for now, unfortunately, this is very difficult and question not resolved.
Well, thank you. And I think that provides a bit of a basis for people who perhaps in the crowd or online have questions about data protection issues, about the transfer of data for research, and of course in machine learning. So I'll open the floor and allow anyone who wishes to raise their hand and participate, ask us any questions, ask the panel entirely or specific people questions. We have two over there, one there. So please up there
I see
first.
two, yeah?
I think there's some important questions to think about here about what we're willing to sacrifice. You know, we always get the impression, and as you said, you know, you had 4 months. 4 months in the old days wasn't that much time, and now 4 months is an eternity. Please.
Thank you. I'm Pilar. I'm from the EuroDIG org team and EuroDIG of Spain. So we've mentioned GDPR a lot, and GDPR became like a basis for almost a lot of countries in the world for data protection. So my question is, how can we ensure that our European approach on data governance and like the new Data Governance Act, the new Data Act, and the more recent regulations also become a beacon like for the rest of the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Should I ask a question?
Please, yeah, we'll take a few and then.
Okay. I'm Mariam. I'm from Georgia. I am the EuroDIG group. My question is, I'm actually now studying biomedical engineering, and we have problems with patient data actually because when we try to do something new and build up the innovation, we have always question who is the owner of this data. Is it patient? Is it us who are trying to do the research on it, or is it the third party or the provider, for example, the healthcare provider? If we could if you could kind of clear up for me, who is the, like, how can we define the ownership of this kind of sensitive data? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Perhaps we'll start, and you can already start finding the next askers. There's one behind you as well, if you want. Maybe question one about spreading European standards. It's a good one, and I think one that, of course, Council Europe we're very interested in, not for the GDPR, but for others. But I'll let Maria take this one.
Okay, thank you for the question. Of course, these are European standards, but when comparing to the rest of the world, maybe in Europe we recognize the value of the data because all these regulations are at the end for the benefit of the society and for the benefit of individuals. So all these regulations are not to make our life or work more complicated, is that to regulate how to, for example, at the beginning when I was mentioning some of the benefits of open data, for how huge potential for economical growth, for creating these data they have, and what is also for policy making, to make informed decisions on the government level, also for the public sector. So we believe that all these standards that we do have in Europe will be recognized also at the rest of the world. And when we speak also about the data protection, okay, here in Europe we do have GDPR, but also it's important to mention this Convention 108 and 108 plus with its protocol, with that convention which creates a global standard for data protection, and it's open for signature and ratification to any country in the world. So I believe that all the countries for their and also private sector and public sector recognize the importance to somehow follow these European values and European approach when it comes to data protection and data governance. So, my opinion.
Perhaps Aurélie as well, because especially when it comes to the next question, maybe you have some input on medical research and how it.
Could you repeat me the next question?
I think the main point that I understood was that there's not a lot of clarity in the ownership of data in medical research and biomedical research. So who is the owner of the data in medical research? Who is responsible for handling and keeping that data safe, for example? And maybe we can add on to it this part about having global standards for exchanging that data, because I think that's also quite an interesting
I really don't like to say ownership of data. I think we are in Europe, so there are no ownership of data. We are not in United States of America, so where you can have another opinion. But about who has to ensure compliance of data processing, of course, it's all the data processor and all the professional scientists and people who are processing data every day, because we know that it's human which incur risk in data processing.
Thank you. Did you have a comment as well, Darius?
Yes, for medical data, this is my field. I think that the biggest point is that our approach to who is proprietary of this data is wrong, because I think we must divide personal data and personal rights and individual rights and group rights. Now in the regulation, right of individual is put over the right of the group. For example, if I am creating new tool for health sector, this will give benefits for many people. So if I must look for 10,000 permissions of owners of data to make my new tools, this is something terrible. So in our protection, we must introduce some kind of collective interest, public interest. And in this case, in safe environment, like some kind of sandbox, the researchers like you must have access to those data without making this kind of reasoning to who is proprietary of the data, I think.
Thank you very much. I know there's online questions as well before we move on to real life ones, but maybe online, one real life question, and then do you have many? It's on the, okay.
Well, me or not?
Please, come on.
Okay. I'm Jacques Pegelinger of Swiss IGF, but then I had the privilege to work at the Council of Europe, or to represent business at the Council of Europe, when we negotiated in 2018 the recommendation on health data. And it was already at that time, there was this sentiment that maybe data protection has gone too far and needs some corrective. Now, my provocative thesis is that the new EU Data Governance Act and the EU Data Act are somehow cutting back on GDPR. I mean, on the overall idea of data protection, and in particular, the idea that every data must be avoided at all price has come to an end. And the pendulum swings back. So that's my thesis. What do you think? To think of that. And maybe you can also explain the difference between Governance Act and a Data Governance Act and Data Act. This creates much confusion in business.
Thank you. So online questions?
Okay, thanks for taking this question. Again, Deborah Allen Rogers, coming to you from The Hague, Digital Fluency Lab called Find Out Why, representing civil society. I think the idea of data ownership should be compared to the idea of we own our own money. And I would like to own my own data. And I would like to be able to opt in and opt out, especially in the case of medical data, for example, of if someone has access to my data. So I don't think it's something that we shouldn't think about in terms of data ownership. it should be on a personal level, like we own our money or we own our property. The other thing I want to say, and then I'm going to ask a question, is I also appreciate, having worked at the Transatlantic Partnership this past summer between American and European values, and I often hear them sort of overlapping. And in many ways, they're not alike at all. And in other ways, they're quite similar. And I do think that the time it takes to build better systems and design the governance and design the encryption to get safe data transferring is worthwhile. So to the data scientists in the panel, it's like the young people can certainly, in your classes, are helping you with this, I'm sure, because I see it in the classes. If I'm ever in the classroom, their minds think this way. So here's my question. If we were to have ownership of our own personal data and have the encryption keys, and then have certain levels of protection if it gets breached, or certain levels of protection for ourselves if we give access, are these things that you're thinking about, anybody on the panel? Because I think ownership of personal data should be a real concern as a part of the collective and as a part of individual freedom and security. Thank you for taking my question.
And I'll add, Alexandra Yevdokimova added, given the bureaucratic burden, how can we ensure that the public sector remains competitive in open data provision, and the big private actors don't just come in with maybe paid but efficient and quick solutions? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. These are some pretty hefty questions, I think. I think, Maria, you said you'd volunteer to see if you can answer that first question.
First question, if I remember well, it was about...
it was about the European
Data Governance Act and in relation to the Data Act and also about lawfulness of processing, something it was...
Yeah, the pendulum swing back. So basically, that it takes away some of the provisions of the GDPR, I think, and goes against some of the spirit of the GDPR.
But, well, I would not say that it is just my opinion that is taking away like the spirit of the GDPR, because at the end, if there will be some kind of conflicts between the provision, the GDPR will prevail. And at the end, if under the Data Governance Act, this data, so the scope of that act is personal and non-personal data. So in the case this data will contain personal data, still you will need to have like a lawful basis for legal processing. You cannot like process or access to this data without a lawful basis for the processing. So I would just say that this act is not confronting the GDPR. There somehow in the provisions of the Data Governance Act, it is very clear that the relationship between the Data Governance Act and GDPR. So in that case, but I understand like your concerns when it comes to the practical application of the of that act. But yes, and when it comes to, so we have a lot of like EU legislation regarding open data, which is like Data Governance Act, and Data Act, which is the second pillar of European data strategy. And somehow this Data Act is complementing Data Governance Act. So the aim of this Data Act is that to enhance the EU economy and foster competitive data market. Somehow the aim of this act to somehow regulate who has the right to the value of that data, which will be shared under the Data Act. And this act focuses more on making industrial data more accessible and usable, encouraging data-driven innovation and increasing data availability. So, and Data Governance Act will somehow, from my perspective, how I see it, to make it more simple, this difference is to make more protected data from the public sector more accessible for the users. Thank you.
Did you have comments on some of the other questions, perhaps?
Yes, about ownership on data. I'm sure that we don't have any ownership on our data, but we have right to access, right to withdraw consent, and so and so. About anonymization, I agree with encrypted protocol, but I have a question: where are the keys? Who has the keys? And it's in my practice, I often see that the keys are kept by American company. It's another problem.
I think that encryption of data, of course, it costs additional money. You must have additional technical resources, but I think that encryption is a good point to start, because maybe additional cost is the cost to safely use the data without anonymization, because in anonymization case, the data became unusable for machine learning. So maybe encryption is the way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's one question behind you over there, and maybe one more. Other than that, we're starting to run out of time already, which is quite impressive. Was there anyone else?
Hello, I'm Emily Khachaturian, coming from the Advisory Council on Youth of Council of Europe, also representing Youth Development Center of Armenia. Thank you very much for the panel. My question was regarding opting out of the usage of data, because there are right now some implementations of that users can pay an additional fee to the platforms to opt out of their data being used. But don't you think that it will cause inequality because between different social groups? Because then people who have more privilege economically will be able to do this, and the lower class, unfortunately, won't be able to protect their data, which is a big issue in our society now. Thank you.
I think that's a fair question. Inequality in data and power over their data. Who'd like to answer?
I will give an answer. I totally agree with you. It's not equal, and I think it's not legal. But the European Court of Justice will have to examine this problem.
I'm a big fan of open data and open source. I think that all the software must be open sourced. All the data must be available free of cost. Is there some kind of blood donor? When I give my blood free, I can ensure the quality. And if I pay for something, I think that the best way to go is all the data open to all. I agree that producing of data also cost money, but we must find some resources to make foundation for creation of data, and so I think the fees is unusable for open data.
Okay, maybe since I think we're out of questions at the moment, unless I've missed someone somewhere in the corners, we could move on to some solutions. Or each of you work in a particular area of your, of expertise. You each have your areas of expertise. What would be a way to enable the free flow of data in a safe manner for your area of work, and how you perceive these risks and opportunities?
In this digital era and the internet, we are much more aware how data protections is even more essential than ever. And I believe that we can what can be some kind of way to ensure easily data flows and sharing data is to building trust also about how we use the data, especially this principle of transparency, which I see very, very important. and to ensure like the security of the data, which will for sure somehow the consequence of that will be that the data sharing will be more easier if we somehow respect all the principles of the data protection, if data subjects will know for which purposes we use their data, if we build like safe and secure like environment, especially on the internet. I would say like security and transparency would somehow affect that in future will affect more will somehow support and data sharing, like if I can say like more in general way, like a general answer. Thank you.
So I think that today our data are mainly transmitted and managed by large companies, companies of big data or big pharma. I think the future of internet will be different because it will decentralize, and data are now destined to pass directly between users, and maybe it will be help to take care of our data. However, I think it's important, the most important is to train new generation on the use on their data.
In our times, in digital economy, data is fuel and is most important thing for our times. But the biggest problem is, I like European Union position, proactive position in regulation. But the biggest problem that regulation and technical progress must go step by step, side by side. Because when these two things are separated in time, there is danger that regulation became our regulation, and the regulation in bad time, or will regulate bad things. So I think that these two must go side by side. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we've essentially, surprisingly enough, we've managed to reach the end, unless there's final comments. I'd like to thank the panelists very much for participating. I know it was my first EuroDIG. I know it was the first EuroDIG for you too. Thank you very much to all the organizers who've made, and the co-organizers of this group, by the way, who helped me in the setting up of the panel discussion. And thank you, Maria. Thank you, all of you for participating. Aurélie, and of course Darius in taking part and answering everyone's questions. I think on that note, we can just end it now.
As a journalist, Moritz, myself, a bit a journalist, I would ask you one last question. If you can say in one sentence, what would be the idea you want all these guys to bring from your session? Okay, 2 sentences, but you know, the main idea.
Each or just me?
You're moderator. Come on, do the hard work.
I think what we're seeing is that there's a tangled web of regulations and rules and that people are sometimes frustrated with, sometimes encouraged by. We're getting better at it, I think. And I think from what we've heard here, people are doing their very best to adapt to the situation. And I think most regulators and most people who work in this field have good interests and good intentions. And that's what I think I would take away overall, is that with international cooperation, with people working on a global scale, on a regional scale, and on a national scale, we're moving forward.
Thank you, Moritz. Thank you one more time. And a few more things. Now we have a break till 5, coming back here. The third subtopic, then intergenerational session. And I have that announcement. I hope you all know and remember that in the evening we are having kind of party in our town hall. So we're expecting all you to meet there around 7. So yeah, be ready. I'll remind you this, be sure, one more time, but just now, before the coffee break. So enjoy your coffee break and see you at 5.